Imagine waking up tomorrow morning to the headlines we've honestly all been dreading. You know the ones. Thousands of workers suddenly losing their jobs, the stock market taking a massive, terrifying dive, businesses slashing costs right and left, and everyday families suddenly struggling just to keep up with their basic bills. It's enough to make absolutely anyone anxious. Well, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking the economic warning signs that nobody can afford to ignore. Okay, let's dive right into this. Is America heading toward a recession? For millions of Americans, this isn't just some abstract economic theory debated by talking heads on television. It is a deeply personal question. We're talking about your job, your home, your savings, your retirement accounts, basically your family's entire future. Look, history has shown us time and time again that economic downturns can change lives literally overnight. We all saw the devastation of the 2008 financial crisis, right? And the massive shock of the 2020 pandemic. So with these warning signs flashing once again, we really need to know, are we on the brink of another major shock? To figure that out, here is our roadmap. We're going to look at the anatomy of a recession, the inflation squeeze, the Fed's difficult choice, the growing debt burden, America's strongest defense, and finally, what happens next. Starting off with Section 1, Anatomy of a Recession. You know, the word recession gets thrown around a lot on the news, usually when people just generally feel like the economy is in a slump. But officially, a recession is a significant decline in economic activity that spreads across the economy and lasts for an extended period. So the absolute crucial point here is the scope and the time. It's widespread and it lasts a while. It's not just, say, one bad month for a specific industry. It's a sustained economy-wide drop. In real life, this decline is basically a cascading domino effect, and it's driven largely by fear. You see, the economy runs on confidence. When people feel secure, they spend money, businesses invest, and markets grow. But when that confidence disappears, well, step 1, consumers get scared and spend less. Step 2, businesses see their sales drop and immediately delay any expansion plans. Step 3, that leads to slower hiring and inevitable layoffs. And step 4, the recession firmly takes hold. Fear essentially paralyzes the entire economic engine. And we definitely can't forget the massive global stakes involved here. The United States is the world's largest economy. American consumers spend trillions of dollars, and American markets influence global investment flows. There's a very famous saying, when America sneezes, the world often catches a cold. A U.S. slowdown instantly impacts factories in Asia, tech companies in India, and auto manufacturers in Europe. The whole world is anxiously watching these American dominoes. Which brings us to Section 2, the inflation squeeze. If we're looking for the very first domino to fall in our current economic mystery, this is undoubtedly it. The relentless, crushing pressure of rising prices that everyone has been feeling over the last few years. What's incredible is just how close to home this hits. Everyday costs are totally exploding. We are talking about the absolute bare-bone necessities: food, gasoline, housing, and insurance. After the pandemic, we saw massive government cash injections combined with completely disrupted supply chains. Factories were shut down, shipping got delayed, but consumer demand wildly surged. The inevitable results? Prices absolutely skyrocketed for the basic things we all rely on to survive. For so many families, their wages simply couldn't keep up with those rising costs. And here is exactly where we connect the dots back to the larger engine of the American economy. Declining purchasing power means consumers are financially squeezed, so they naturally have to spend less. And as we learned in the anatomy of a recession, if consumers stop spending, business growth stalls out. If businesses stop growing, your jobs become vulnerable. It is a direct, undeniable chain reaction straight from your grocery store checkout line to national recession fears. Now let's look at Section 3, the Fed's difficult choice. So, how do we stop inflation before it wrecks the entire economy? Well, to fight this inflation monster, the Federal Reserve launched one of the most aggressive interest rate campaigns we have seen in decades. But it is a brutal balancing act. On one side, if the Fed raises rates too little, inflation stays dangerously high, and families keep getting crushed by the cost of living. But on the flip side, if they raise rates too much, borrowing becomes extremely expensive. Mortgage payments rise, credit card debt spirals out of control, business loans get too pricey, and the whole economy slows down so fast that it crashes right into a recession. Interest rates are a powerful weapon, but man, they cause massive collateral damage to everyday Americans. The Federal Reserve's balancing act right now is quite literally like trying to land a massive commercial airplane on a ridiculously tiny runway. One small mistake, pull up too much, push down too hard, and the consequences for the economy are totally catastrophic. It is an incredibly delicate and highly, highly risky maneuver. Moving on to Section 4, the growing debt burden. Making that tiny runway landing even harder is another bright red flashing warning sign. The massive and continuously growing amount of money owed by both everyday citizens and the government. We called the consumer side of this the household debt trap. Because those everyday costs we talked about earlier are so incredibly high, many households have started relying on credit cards just to maintain their normal standard of living. At first, it doesn't seem that dangerous, but balances silently accumulate, then those higher interest rates from the Fed kick in, and soon debt consumes a larger and larger portion of your income. It creates immense financial stress, ultimately forcing people to cut back on spending even more aggressively. And hey, it's not just us at home feeling the pinch. The US government itself carries enormous debt obligations. With interest rates up, the government is now forced to spend billions of dollars simply paying the interest on that debt alone. This creates immense pressure on national policymakers, heavily limiting their options and resources to actually help stimulate the economy if things do start to crash.
Next up, Section 5, America's strongest defense.
So, with inflation squeezing us, interest rates punishingly high, and debt piling up across the board, why hasn't the economy crashed yet? The answer, and honestly our most compelling defense, is America's remarkably resilient workforce. But right now, economists are fiercely debating what this actually means for the future. One camp says, hey, a strong labor market means recession risks are totally overstated. People have jobs, so we are absolutely fine. But the other camp warns that employment is what's called a lagging indicator. In other words, companies try to hold on to their workers as long as possible, so massive job losses usually only appear after the underlying economic problems have already set in. Still, you can't argue with the current data. Continued hiring and real wage increases in several sectors have kept consumer spending remarkably strong. This job market has essentially acted as a massive shield, propping up the American economy and completely defying the expectations of many top analysts, despite all the surrounding fears. Finally, Section 6, what happens next? So where exactly does all of this leave us? We've looked at the very real threats, and we've looked at the surprisingly strong defenses. Our current reality is a tense economic tug-of-war. On one side, you have undeniable warning signs: high interest rates making borrowing painful, heavy household and government debt burdens, and persistent uncertainty pointing to slower growth. But directly countering that on the other side, you have incredible resilience, a surprisingly robust labor market, stubborn consumer spending, and continued business investment. History teaches us that recessions rarely arrive with a loud announcement, right? They usually emerge slowly, hidden right beneath seemingly normal conditions. And if a downturn does happen, not every recession is the same. Some are short, mild blips, others are severe and long-lasting. The severity of the next downturn will depend on a few highly specific variables: the health of our banks, that absolutely crucial level of consumer confidence, the government's response, broader global economic conditions, and perhaps most importantly, how quickly and effectively our policymakers react to the changing tides. Which brings us to our final takeaway. Economic cycles will always continue. They always do. The warning signs are clearly flashing, but the structural strengths of the economy are fighting back with surprising force. So the ultimate question we are left with is this: can America navigate today's challenges without tipping into a major downturn? As investors, workers, and citizens watch the data unfold, one thing is absolutely certain: the next chapter of the American economy is still being written, and the entire world is waiting to see how the story ends. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes on the data and keep learning.